Today's podcast guest shared a startling statistic with me. We spend a whopping 82,000 hours of our lives at work. And while many of us are great at prioritising our physical health outside the office, we often forget about our physical health in the place that we spend most of our waking hours. It's a bit of a disconnect, and it could be harmful in the long run. Hi, I'm Sarah McGuinness, founder of Revolutionaries of Wellbeing, and I'm on a mission to break burnout culture for good. This podcast is all about giving you practical tips and ideas to create a healthier, more supportive workplace and support your wellbeing too. Today we're joined by Agnes Lisowska Masson from Logitech. Agnes is an expert in human-computer interaction and works in the lab to discover what really works. She's here to shed some light on how our workspace design can impact our health, productivity, and overall well-being.
The average office worker in just 1 year will move their mouse about the distance of 10 kilometers and make 1 million keystrokes. It's a huge amount of time and impact that we're making on our bodies for something that's happening in the office where we're not necessarily putting in that same effort for looking at well-being.
Today we'll explore how to make our workspaces work for us, not against us, and we'll look at how small changes in our daily routines can make a big difference. So no matter where you're working, from home, in a shared office space, or a traditional office setting, this episode is packed with useful tips to help you work smarter and create a happy desk space that will boost your well-being.
I think I was always interested in how people function, and especially in relation to technologies. In the past, we had to adapt to technology. Now technology is sufficiently ahead that it should be able to adapt to us rather than the other way around. And so what really interested me was how we can do that, how we can make technology work for people so that we can maximize our performance, our fun whenever we're working with technologies.
And just for our audience, when we're defining technologies, what does that kind of mean in your world?
It could be anything. It could be the peripherals that we're using. So the mice, keyboards, headsets, which are obviously part of what we do at Logitech. It can also be software and, for gaming, and how that interaction between the software and the hardware and the human happens, and how you can maximize those interactions in a positive way so that people enjoy it. They feel comfortable playing, working, learning, really to sort of bring all of those benefits where technology isn't a blocker. Technology kind of disappears into the background, and you can do what you want to do in a really smooth, efficient, comfortable way. A lot of us think about well-being when we're outside of the office. So we go jogging, we try to eat healthy, we do yoga, etc. But the reality is that we spend 82,000 hours in our lifetimes working. And the average office worker in just 1 year will move their mouse about the distance of 10 kilometers and make 1 million keystrokes. For the top 10% of users, those numbers double. For the top 1%, they quadruple. It's a huge amount of time and impact we're making on our bodies for something that's happening in the office where we're not necessarily putting in that same effort for looking at well-being.
Because I just love the sound of your lab. Tell me more about the work that you've been doing and the experiments for this stuff.
So part of it we get from academic research that has been done in other labs, but part of it, like you mentioned, we also do in the lab ourselves. So we have state-of-the-art sensors to look at muscle activity, to look at posture, to look at pressure. And then when teams come to us, we sort of look at how much ergonomics it makes sense to infuse into a product, and then we actually do the tests on people. So we measure muscle activity, we measure posture, and we can quantify differences between different design ideas, for example, and say this one has more ergonomic benefit than this one does. And that helps the teams sort of tweak designs so that we bring as much of these benefits to our customers as possible.
I mean, technology has changed tremendously in terms of how we work, and it seems to be sort of getting faster and faster. Tell me, what are some of the early trends that you're seeing at the moment? What are some of the things that are standing out for you in this space?
I think a lot of it is about how much people are using technologies in various contexts in life. We use technology at work. Kids are using technology in school, and then we go home and we still use technologies. A lot of us have mobile phones on us all the time, and we're using all the time. So all of that accumulates the amount of interaction we have compared to 20 years ago, 40 years ago. And if technology isn't designed the right way, or if we're not using them in spaces that are set up correctly, then that can have an impact on our well-being overall. So I think that's one of the big trends that we're seeing, is that there's this increased use in technology, and that cumulative use in the different contexts that we're in throughout the day has an overall impact on how we feel at the end of the day, at the end of a work day, a learning day, etc.
And what are some of those impacts? Because I was thinking, even for myself, I mean, I've had to increase my glasses. I sit on a Swiss ball, part of my ergonomics. So you must see people. I mean, well, tell me, do you see people trying to make it better? Because between, I imagine, headaches or back pain or any of those things can really impact our well-being.
People are trying, but there's so much information out there, and there's so many ways in which our technologies can impact our well-being that sometimes it can be hard to figure out what the source of a particular discomfort is. And I mean, we see the numbers. We can see, for example, that around 60% of work from home computer users are feeling strain on a regular basis, right? And I mean, one of the reasons is that when we're in an office setting, there tends to be someone who is responsible for setting up that workspace. We have proper office chairs, desks, etc. And so there's a little bit more sort of information, even if it's in the background, that's available about how that space should be set up. When we move to a work from home setting, or even a mobile setting, we lose that background from someone else having already helped us set up a workspace. And we don't necessarily know what it is that we should be looking out for. And I think that's why a lot of people, and we saw this during the lockdowns, during the pandemic, that all of a sudden people found themselves working from home, myself included, where I was working from my dining room table. And I realized that the chairs were great for a 1 or 2 hour dinner, not so much for an 8-hour workday, right? So it kind of pushes you to go, okay, there's something about the chair. What do I need to do? And then I started looking at what the elements are of the chair, the lower back support, being able to have the right height adjustment and things like that, where then you sort of go from what you're noticing is an impact on you, and then trying to figure out how you can help that. In some cases, like with the chair, it might be a little bit easier to figure out. In other cases, it might be less obvious. But I think people tend to underestimate how much we do use these peripherals, and how much the impact of having a workspace that's not appropriately set up can have on their well-being at the end of the day.
I think that's such a valuable insight, because as you were talking, I was thinking we spend so much time setting up other areas of our life. For example, I don't know, if you were designing a kitchen, you'd be really specific about where the plates are going and the dishwasher's going to go. But so many of us stick a laptop on a table and go, that's a desk, and not consider how many hours we actually spend at it.
I mean, the laptops are a great example. And I think this is one of the things that a lot of people do. And like you said, they just put a laptop on a desk and work with that, and they don't realize the impact that can have. And one of the pieces of research that we saw come in is the impact that using a laptop on a desk versus using a laptop on a stand or some sort of a support can have. Basically, the human head weighs about 6 kilograms, and your body's made to support that weight as long as your head is straight over your spinal column and looking straight ahead. And when you're using a laptop sitting on a table, your head bends down 10 to 15 degrees, right? Which may not seem like a lot, but it actually pretty much doubles the effective weight that your neck and shoulder muscles have to hold. So you're going from having a 2-month-old sitting on your shoulders to a 2-year-old, basically just with having a laptop on a desk, right? And so not many of us would volunteer to have a 2-year-old sitting on our shoulders for 8 hours, right? But that's what the impact is on your body. And then a lot of people at the end of the day go, oh, my shoulders are sore, my neck is sore, and they can't figure out why. And one of the causes might be because the laptop is on the desk. The really simple solution is to just lift the laptop up. You put it on a stand, stack of books, anything to get that screen higher, which lifts your head up. And then that releases some of that strain in the neck and the shoulders.
That's huge. Because as you were saying, it's almost the same as the phone. Like if you're doing that with your laptop and then you're doing that with your phone,
the phone makes it worse.
Terrible. So tell me, what are some of the other workspace habits that you see that most of us probably have no idea is having an impact on our well-being?
One is how your desk and your chair are set up in terms of what's appropriate for you, right? So we all have different heights, we all have different physiologies. And the really simple idea is that you want your feet planted flat on the ground, your ankles, knees, hips, and elbows at about 90 degrees, right? So you need to play around with the adjustment of your chair and your table if you can adjust them to get as close to those angles as possible. And that puts your body in a more natural position where it relieves a lot of that strain. Another big one is back support. So even sliding something like a pillow, if you don't have an ergonomic chair, sliding something like a pillow in the arch of your back can add some support. So that's something that's really simple. If you don't have adjustable furniture, again, you can use it by adding a footrest, there's lots of different things you can do that are quite simple. And I think that's one really big thing. Another one is having peripherals that are adapted to, again, your body size. Right? Ergonomics is not a one size fits all solution. Not everything will work the same way for everyone. So, for example, one thing that people get surprised a lot about is the size of keyboards. We tend to think of a keyboard as a long keyboard. But what we see is that actually, if you don't need the number pad and some of the keys that are in that sort of right-hand section of the keyboard, having a shorter keyboard actually has ergonomic benefits for you because it brings your shoulder closer to your body, which actually releases the strain. So your shoulder, when it's in a natural position, is pretty much aligned with the sides of your body. When you have a long keyboard, particularly if you have a smaller stature like I do, having to reach for a mouse on the far end of that keyboard means that your shoulder is no longer in a natural position. So having that shorter keyboard brings your shoulder back into a more natural position and again releases some of that strain. And similar with the mouse should be kept relatively close to the keyboard, sort of so that your forearm is ideally sitting a little bit on the desk, so especially so that avoiding having your wrist crease on the edge of the desk, because that can cause a lot of pressure in an area of the wrist that's quite sensitive. So it's little things like that that can already go a long way into helping you feel better as you're working.
That's amazing. And tell me, are you allowed to tell me what's kind of next? What's the next thing when it comes to ergonomics?
Again, it's hard to say what the next thing is because it can be very different. Ergonomics is generally sort of a relative concept, and it's, like I said, it's not one size fits all. So it's not that one solution will fit everybody. So we work on a lot of different projects from a lot of different angles, but we always take into consideration who the target audience is, who it's likely to be. There's sort of 5 factors that we really need to consider. One is the physiology of the person, their size, which I already mentioned, the fact that they might have predispositions to aches and pains in different parts of their body. For example, I always take everything in my neck and shoulders. Some people it's the back, some people it's the forearms, wrists, etc. The type of activity that they're doing, whether it's really intense or something that's more relaxed, where they're doing it, right? Is it tend to be a properly set up office space? Is it a more mobile context, work from home, etc.? The time that they're doing it, right? Is it meant to be someone who's going to be working for maybe just 30 minutes, an hour, 3 hours, or someone working 8-hour days? And then, of course, the peripherals that we're using. And so when we look at ergonomics, we look at all of those things together and figure out how much might be needed for a particular person or a particular group of people. And that's really what we focus on. So it's, again, because it's not a one size fits all solution, it's really about thinking what makes sense in a particular context for a particular group of people.
I think that's a really interesting point around those diversity of workspaces, because so many organizations have moved to hybrid working and then lots have gone to the hot desk concept. But I imagine the hot desk concept brings up a whole lot of new challenges if every time you come to a new desk that you've booked, if that's how your system works, you've got to adjust everything. I mean, what are you seeing in your work?
I think that's one of the things that, from my own personal experience, I've had to force myself. We do hot desking in the office where I work, and I've had to teach myself that first thing I do, even if I'm in a rush, even if I have meetings, is to take that time to set up the desk, because once we get into that work mode, we're rushing between meetings, we're talking to people, we won't do it. But that means that we're spending that whole day in a poorly set up space potentially, right? So I think that's one of the things that people tend to forget is, yes, we hot desk, but instinctively, the first thing you should do is to make sure that the space is set up for you and your needs, and then go from there. And I think that is one of the sort of concerns in terms of ergonomics with hot desking and hybrid working and things like that, is that you are working in all of these environments. You don't necessarily have the same peripherals in all of the environments. So it's really taking the time to think about what you need, what works for you. Do you have the right peripherals? Do you have the right desk height? Do you have the right chair setup? And making that little extra effort. And after a while, you get used to it and it becomes sort of natural and you realize, oh, I haven't done it. But yeah, it adds an extra step.
I suppose it'd be like hiring a car and not changing your seat and all those bits and pieces and the mirror and all those things you do when you hire a car.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. It's really, really the same thing.
What are some of the ways a poorly designed workspace can impact other things like creativity or energy, all those things?
So what we've seen is that there's lots of different factors that come into play, and part of the setup is the furniture itself, so your desk and your chair, and having peripherals that are adapted to your particular physiology. But there's other little factors that come up as well. For example, one that I really like is having a space that's set up in a way that makes you happy. We've seen research that shows that when you're in a good mood, you're actually more creative. You're better at brainstorming. You're better at looking at different alternatives to problem solving and things like that. So even having peripherals that are a color you like, right? Or having some plants or your favorite mug or a picture of a loved one, all of that when you come to your desk to start working puts you in a better mood, and that can give you that little extra boost. Another thing that people tend to forget about is something like air quality, where if you have poor air quality in a room, then that can lead to headaches, it can lead to lack of attention and concentration, and all of those effects can then have a knock-off effect on your performance, right? So if you have the possibility to air out a space or to make sure that the ventilation is suitable and strong enough, then that as well can give you a really extra and sort of a good extra boost. And for me, I've gotten into the habit of opening my windows on a regular basis, even in the middle of winter. Open them for 5 minutes. You get a nice little cold, fresh air boost that wakes you up, but it also changes that air and it reduces the risk of having that accumulation of CO2, which can then have all of those health effects.
That's such an important insight. Reflecting on that, mind you, what it did make me also think of is in how some workplaces there's also temperature, isn't there? And there's never a right temperature for everyone.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's the thing. Like some of the things we can control, and then others we can't. So at least my approach is to maximize what we can control, and the other things, well, you just have to deal with it. But I think there are a lot of things that we can do for ourselves that can help boost our productivity or energy levels when we're at work.
And tell me about ergonomic tools. So we've talked about, mice, keyboard, chair. Are there any other things? I mean, even for example, we're all talking to camera at the moment. Or there must be sort of a suite of things as well, is there, that we need to think about when we're designing kind of a happy space on the desk? I love that concept of a happy space at the desk. So great.
A very sort of basic story with ergonomics is that you're trying to bring your body into a natural posture. Natural posture for the human body is what you see when someone is free floating in a pool, right? So there's lots of bends and curves and things like that. Obviously, we live in gravity, so that doesn't quite work. But the idea is still the same. Like if you look at your own natural posture, just stand up, relax your arms on the side, and you can see that your fingers are slightly curved, that your elbows aren't completely straight. Even your knees, usually when you're standing, aren't rigidly straight. And so the idea is to bring your body as close as possible to those postures. And again, the 90-degree angles when you're sitting brings your body into a natural position when you're sitting. So just being aware of what that position is and making sure that when you're using different peripherals and different devices and in that space, that you try to bring your body to that natural posture as much as possible, because then that releases tension in your muscles. It makes things easier for your joints and things like that. So that's the general rule, is to try to sort of bring your body to a natural position. If you're feeling discomfort from the get-go, then that's the first sign. Like, discomfort is the very, very first sign of poor ergonomics. And sometimes you feel discomfort right away. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. But if you're feeling it, it means there's something going on that needs to be looked at.
And then tell me, in terms of desk layouts, is there any kind of gold standard on what a great desk layout looks like? Or is it just really individual? And I suppose it depends a lot on the space too, like natural light and all those other things.
There's some general simple rules that do tend to apply. So, for example, having your screen about an arm's length away and the top of your screen in sort of the top third, having the top third part of your screen in line with your line of sight when you're looking straight ahead. Again, with keyboards and mice, to have them sufficiently pushed onto the table so that you can rest a little bit of your forearm on the table, so that you don't have the edge of the table resting on the wrist crease. Again, lighting, you should have the lighting set up to avoid having glare on the screen, because that can cause additional eye fatigue. Natural light, if possible, is a little bit better than artificial light. And yeah, it's basically, I think those are the key elements to look out for. And then having, again, this desk height chair adjustment to make sure that allowing your body to be in as natural a position as possible.
Over your lifespan, that must change as well, does it? And I mean, I'm thinking, this sounds terrible. My mother is shrinking. Does it mean that what would have worked in her 20s, it doesn't work in her 60s?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, our bodies change over time, and I can see for myself that me in my 20s is not the same thing as me now. I tend to get aches and pains more often. I tend to get them in different places. I see my son, who sits in all sorts of atrocious positions in terms of posture, but doesn't feel anything, right? So I think we all change and we all adapt. And like I said, we're all different in terms of the predispositions we have to aches and pains. So yeah, I think every once in a while, it's a good idea to sort of check in with yourself and say, okay, at this point, this is what I need. This is where I'm comfortable. And yeah, to do that on a regular basis, because something that works for me might not work for someone else. That was also one of the things we noticed during the pandemic, is we would discuss different solutions. I've set things up this way and it works really well. And then someone else would try it and go, that doesn't work at all for me. Right. So it's really this idea of finding what works for you at a given time and in a given context. And that might change. It might be a little bit different in a hybrid context, a little bit different in an office context. And that's okay. But the idea is to really sort of focus on you and what works for you.
Have you found there's any one thing that's been really important for you, sort of no matter where you sit? Do you have like a one thing that's like a super important habit?
I think for me, the big thing, and I get a lot of sort of giggles when I mention this, is taking breaks. And because we can have the best peripherals, the best setup in an office space, if we don't take regular breaks, we're still likely to feel discomfort over time. And so the general recommendation is to take a 5 to 10 minute break every hour or so, and really sort of get up, move around, get away from your screen, because our bodies are made to move. Our bodies aren't made to sit all day. They're not made to stand all day. They need that motion to function correctly. And so by getting up and moving and taking a break, we allow them to have that space, and it's great for our brains too. It's been shown to reduce stress. It's been shown to reduce end of day fatigue. So it has all sorts of benefits. And I've been doing this fairly regularly. It started again during the pandemic when I was working from home, and I would get up and put in a load of laundry. And, then an hour later, when the load of laundry is done, you go out, you take it out, right? Or go to water your plants. A lot of people associate breaks with not doing anything. And I think that breaks, as long as you do the break right, it can have a lot of benefits. And you can also be productive in different ways, right? So you're taking a break from work, but you're still doing something useful. And in the long run, that has very big benefits for your productivity at work as well.
It's when you solve problems at the washing line, isn't it? Couldn't solve them at your desk, but you solved them at the washing line.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wonderful. And I love that example, because For a lot of people, there are deadlines and priorities, and for whatever reason, we're stuck at our desk. And so that reminder that, one, it's really important to, I love that, create that happy space where you feel productive, but you are also stepping away and having that mental and physical break as well, and just how important that restorative part of this is too.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, when we were working in offices, you move between meetings, you have people come to you. And so you have natural chats and things like that. When you're working from home, you don't have that as much. So there's more of a tendency to go from back to back, one meeting to another meeting. You don't have these natural micro breaks that come up more often in an office setting. And I think that's also one of the reasons why we tend to see this discomfort coming up in work from home settings, because we don't have, or we have fewer of these natural breaks that are built into our day. There's an expectation to be on time for a meeting, whereas if you were in office and you had to walk from one meeting room to another, it's okay. It's normal that people are a couple of minutes late, right? So, and during that time, you have that little break.
Yeah, 100%. You can see how easy it is to be back to back. In fact, you might be interested in this. We did a focus group in Southeast Asia, and the employees talked about the requirement to be on 2 Zoom meetings at once. I don't actually know how you do that at all. So I'm not sure that's very good for productivity. Tell me, what are some of the things that people could do to improve their workspace? If they're listening to this going, yeah, I think I need to do something. Where do I start?
My first recommendation is to really sort of take stock of your space, take a good look at your space. Some of these adjustments of where your screen is placed, do you have the right peripherals? Are they placed in the right place? Is your chair and your desk set up at the right height? And that might seem like a long list of things, but I think it's really sort of to take stock. And one thing we did as a fun little exercise with people's consent, of course, is we took pictures of them without them knowing, to show them this is your actual working posture compared to what is recommended. Because a lot of people think, oh, no, I'm fine, right? And you're fine for the first few seconds as you're working. And then over time, your posture kind of changes and shifts. And you end up working on a long stretch in a posture that's suboptimal, right? And so it's, for me, a big part of getting into well-being and helping yourself is this first step of self-awareness of, this is me, this is how I work, this is my space. And then starting small, because there's long, long lists of things we can do, and that can sometimes feel really overwhelming. So my recommendation is always start small, start with whatever speaks to you the most in terms of a recommendation, and go with that. Work on that. Once that's become a habit, you can add something else. And that also helps you fine tune what really works for you and what doesn't. Because if you start with a big change, it's overwhelming. There's lots of things happening at once. And if something isn't working, you don't know what it is that isn't working, right? So I think for me, that's one of those things, is start small, take little steps. And little steps can already have a really big impact on your overall well-being, right? So you can start with setting up the happy space on your desk, and maybe adding sort of taking stock about whether the peripheral is the right size for your hands, right? Little things like that. And then just a little bit at a time, you add additional things.
Just on that one, so in terms of size of your hands, is there some kind of guide that people could do to find out what's the right size? I think if I walk into our local hardware store and I'm like, do my hands fit my keyboard?
So we do have a guide on our website that uses credit cards to help you figure out more or less what size you are. We actually have more specific numbers as well. But in general, if you put your hand on a peripheral, you can more or less feel if it's the right size, right? So if you can go into a store and put your hand on an actual mouse, you can see, can you reach the scroll wheel comfortably? Can you reach the front end of the buttons? One big thing is your wrist, right? Your wrist should be relatively straight. Like if it's too bent or too in either direction, then it's probably a sign that the product isn't suited. If you have to reach too far on the sides to be able to hold the mouse, then it's probably too wide for you. So there's these little flags that you can look out for quite easily. Obviously, if you're buying online, that becomes a little bit harder, and these sizing guides that in case we provide for our products can help you figure out what might make sense for you. And we do have a number of products in our lines that have actually 2 sizes. So you can choose the size that's more adapted to yourself.
So interesting. I'd never, ever really considered that. We buy clothes of different sizes, but I had never considered that my mouse might be the wrong size for me. And yet that seems quite important to know. That's awesome. For those working on a budget, it sounds like, starting small is obviously the way to go. And would you provide any other advice around what they could be doing?
In terms of setting up your workspace, there's lots of solutions that we already have lying around. Like I said, support for lower back, you can just put in a pillow. Even in terms of chair height, you can use a pillow to boost your height compared to a chair, or you can use a ream of paper to lift up your laptop, or even as a footrest. I've heard of people using boxes of board games as footrests or laptop stands. There's little things like that. If you don't have a sit-stand desk, you can imagine, depending on how your house is set up, using either a kitchen sort of bar counter or even a lower bookshelf as a sort of temporary standing space to be able to alternate between sitting and standing. So there's a lot of things that you can do that don't necessarily imply big changes. It's probably things you already have lying around your house that you can use to help you. And I think, again, this notion of having peripherals that are the right size, especially if you have a small space, having a smaller keyboard, having a mouse that's the right size can help reduce the amount of space that you need for your peripherals while giving you those little ergonomic boosts that you might need. I'm a strong believer in the fact that we tend to be overwhelmed by information about what we should be doing. And there's a lot. And in the case of workspace well-being, there's lots of little things that we can do where if we already integrate those little things, whether it's breaks, whether it's having the right peripherals, whether it's setting up your chair height and things like that, it can already go a long way. And we don't have to do everything in one shot. A lot of people come with the assumption that if I want to have better well-being, I have to do the whole list. And it's really not the case. And by starting small, we also give ourselves a natural encouragement where one thing worked and we're more motivated to try something else. Whereas, again, if you take a lot of things and you do them all at the same time, chances are, because we're all different, some things might not work for us for whichever reason. And then instead of seeing the benefits of all of the little things that we have done that work well, we tend to focus on the things that don't work and potentially give up. And then we lose out on all of the little other potential benefits that we can have. So I think my big takeaway is to really start small, start with the things that speak to you, because again, that will motivate you to do that. And that's what I did personally. And I've seen that work for lots of people as well. So I think that would be my overall recommendation. Start small, work your way up, and figure out what works best for you.
Thanks again for joining us today. If you found this discussion valuable and you're hungry for more ideas, head to the Revolutionaries of Wellbeing website at rowwellbeing.com. That's rowwellbeing.com. Here you can join the revolution, explore more resources, events and tips to help you break burnout culture for good, and you can register to attend our live recordings and be part of the conversation on the day. To those in our network, thanks again, and we look forward to catching up with you really soon.